if I knew I would fail, I would still...
Where's your shadow, right? So that's probably like a really good place to start for many people. What am I judging? And how would, if I were to integrate that thing that I'm judging into myself positively, how would that make me be able to hit my goals at a higher, faster, and better level? The very idea that a person can take control of their own sort of self and destiny, I think, is maybe the starting point of personal development and the starting point of conscious evolution. Self-actualization as not being the pinnacle of development, but actually said that self-transcendence was.
Who are the teachers in the self-development world that you lean on, that you enjoy, that you take a lot from? If you're into self-development, if you're really trying to figure out what's important, you're trying to make sense of all the information that's out there, and really you're just wanting to be able to live the meaningful, successful life that you want to be able to live, I really think that you're going to enjoy this conversation. You're going to enjoy this episode. This is a recording of a fantastic conversation between myself and I think a new best friend, Gavin, that you'll meet in just a second, because he's an exceptional human being. And as you'll see, if you've been watching my stuff or listening to the episodes previously, I don't do the typical interviews where I have a list of questions and I just bang these questions out and someone has their pretty much pre-answered responses to those questions. These are conversations, and as you'll see inside of this conversation is me really trying to be able to learn from Gavin and us going through a dialogue together of figuring this stuff out together as well. So I would love to know what it is that you find valuable from this episode. So if you're in YouTube, leave a comment. If you're listening to the podcast, leave a review and tell me what it is that you're finding valuable. Send me a DM or write a scribbled note and put it into a carrier pigeon. Somehow let me know what it is that you're finding valuable. And if you do find this helpful, if you do find this insightful, if you do find this something that is actually worth your time, then make the algorithm gods like upon what's going on, hit like as well. But I'm really wanting to find out what it is that you get from this episode as myself and Gavin, we work through the world of self-development. We go through what it is that can be holding us back, what can be confusing, what can be actually roadblocks for us becoming the people that we need to become, to live, experience, and feel the things that we want at the end of the day. So let's get into it, because this conversation, I have literally pages of notes here from going back through it again, and I know you're going to really enjoy this. So what I'm really interested in, and I think especially when it comes to like the expertise that you have, the experience that you have, Gavin, is in a really stepping back view, the world of self-development. There is a lot of, I never want to pull people down, but I think there's a lot of maybe misguided, miseducated, unfactual, regurgitated insights, advice that's maybe pushing people to the wrong way, not giving them what it is that's actually needed as well. So when it comes to the world of self-development, Gavin, what do you feel like is actually the things that we should be putting our focused interest, energy, and effort into?
Tell me what you really think, mate. Tell me what you really
That's what I'm here to ask you, and then I'll put my 2 cents in.
No, I love that take. No, look, I think you're spot on in terms of the self-development world. I think, a lot of people maybe saw it as a space to make a quick buck, but the actual term, development, I think refers to something from developmental psychology, which refers to sort of the natural stages of growth in consciousness and value systems of people as they kind of transcend up like a hierarchy of needs, right? And so at its best, I think personal development and self-development is understanding that there is a evolutionary path that humans take. Obviously, biologically, we haven't changed in 300,000 years or something like that. But as a society, we've sort of evolved, and to sort of take a conscious approach to literally conscious, as in to understand that there is approach to sort of developing oneself and doing that. I think that is the best that personal development has to offer. But understanding that there are stages and levels, I think is really, really important.
When you talk to stages and levels, are you talking to the concepts that Ken Wilber would be pointing out, as in stages and developmental of how we actually evolve through consciousness and psychology?
Yeah, 100%. So a lot of the stuff from Wilber and even I guess earlier from Claire Graves and those sorts of developmental stuff is 100% spot on. I love the model spiral dynamics. That's something I talk about and reference a lot. Even at a more basic level, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think, is a really, really good one. Insofar as that you see, as a nation or as people sort of hit some of those needs, they get higher and higher up that chain and start to care about different things and value different things, literally value different things. And I think one of the interesting parts about that is that just before Maslow died, he actually sort of took self-actualization as not being the pinnacle of development, but actually said that self-transcendence was. And I think, to go back to your first question as to, well, what is the worst part of personal development? It's that it keeps people locked in an actualization frame. And the part we really need to get to, probably as as an industry, is to sort of start thinking beyond the self and to start going through that actualization. So yes, you become successful and wealthy, and you cultivate that status and that, but then you really start to ask the question, how do I use these things to sort of further, to go beyond my personal sense of self-interest, or expand that sense of self so it includes the collective as well?
I think I just found my new best friend. In two things come up for me when you say that. The first thing that came up for me was kind of like more of the Hindu philosophy, where it was like, at the beginning, we're looking for pleasure, we're looking for happiness, we're looking for joy. Might not be the best word, through things like food, sex, do you know what I mean? Like more of the kind of like in the moment. Then we find out that is not giving us everlasting fulfillment. So then we move on to things such as like money, power, status. Then we find out that doesn't give us the things that we're really looking for, that ultimate fulfillment. Then we go into things such as like altruism and wanting to give and wanting to be able to help the world. Then we find out that doesn't give us the ultimate thing. And then when it really comes down to it, it is transcendence, it is enlightenment, is beyond going through ourselves, that is ultimately the thing that is everlasting to give us fulfillment. And interesting for myself, on a very personal, experiential point, it was, I sold my company at the end of last year, and I just found it very interesting looking upon myself, going through kind of like literally like Maslow's hierarchy, coming to a point where I'm completely financially free now, and how my perspective has completely changed, how my decision making's changed, how my kind of like view upon the world has completely changed, for what I hope is actually the better, because I transcended one thing. And I was like, I definitely was not coming, maybe I was, no, fuck it. Probably I was coming from a scarcity point of view before, where that's not there anymore. So I find that really interesting now, kind of like looking upon how am I showing up differently, and what's the trajectory that I'm going on now. And I think that's why I find this conversation really salient for me.
No, I mean, 100%. And you're a really good example of someone who's gone in that sort of more linear fashion, which is really great, in that you've actually done these things so that you have enough power and wealth and status and time to actually be able to affect these changes. And I think one of the interesting things that happens with development, it's not necessarily linear. People don't always do it sequentially. And so sometimes you can find yourself wanting to sort of save the world before you've saved yourself, right? Yes. And that's another huge component of this whole thing. And I've certainly fallen into that trap before. And I know a lot of the people in sort of the conscious communities, the more spiritual communities, will often be like that. They've got a really grand vision, but they, struggling to sort of make ends meet themselves. And that's quite problematic. And so this development, I think, it's about sort of holism, integral theory and all that kind of stuff. Integration really just means to kind of be whole. So I think that's why spiral dynamics is a really cool way to look at it. But yeah, I mean, you tell me, like, you're in a really cool position. So like, what does that look like for you now? You wake up, like, what does that feel like to be able to essentially just be able to kind of decide what you want to do from a totally different place of abundance versus scarcity?
Really quickly, I love that you're joining us on the podcast. And if you haven't yet, I have a YouTube channel, which is our main hub. This is where we have all the episodes, so you can watch the conversations and join each episode to get all of the best content, the best insights. So click over to YouTube, go to the Christopher Dufey channel, as I would love for you to be able to join us there. Well, it's super interesting for me, because I really came to a point of like, all right, I'm working now more than when I was actually running the company that I sold. Purely from a point of view now, because my fascination comes into, I'm wanting to learn and share. like that's like the basis of what I want to be able to do now. Like I want to be able to learn in the topics and go deep into the areas that highly fascinate me. And I want to be able to cultivate my view so that I myself, to be perfectly honest, can live a more meaningful life. And then hopefully I'm putting down some breadcrumbs for other people to be able to pick up, to be able to do the same. And I'm really thinking about that concept of like, so for example, I've gone on a mad Pierre Hadot tear. Do you know what I mean? I'm reading a bunch of his books at the moment, going really deep into it. And one of them, I was just finishing off the philosophy as a way of life, but then starting Inner Citadel, where he really goes deep into Marcus Aurelius' meditations and pulling that apart. And what he goes into, which I find fascinating, is like the spiritual practices of, let's say, Stoicism or Hellenistic period philosophy, and how do we actually start applying those practices? Because for me, I come back to it and I'm like, I can be bearded, tatted up, do you know what I mean, gym junkie of a meathead guy. Like I'm trying to conceptualize and be like, all right, as a father of 4 daughters, as a husband, as an entrepreneur, as a friend, as a man, how do I best bloody well show up to live a life? And even also very much wanting to be, I'm a flawed human being. Do you know what I mean? I've had depression, I've had suicidal ideation, I've had severe anxiety. Like, how do I, do you know what I mean, dance with what comes up with life? And thinking about that from a practical, pragmatic point of view of like, what are the things that I actually need to be doing to be able to do that? And I find it interesting because when you say transcendence, for me, I'm wanting to grasp that more firmly. So when it comes to transcendence, Gavin, what's the definition? What's the kind of way that you interpret that?
Yes, that's a great question. So I would say that transcendence, so almost by definition, when you get into this realm, you go into what's called non-symbolic. And so language becomes quite challenging as a way of describing these things as a whole. But I think the concept of self changes. And right now, most people would say, "Oh, that person's so self-interested," and they refer to them sort of caring about this like body, this little meat suit that we've all got on, right? But as you sort of expand that, as you say, then you're a father, or you've got your kids, then that sense of self sort of expands to, okay, well, now I'm going to do what's right for me and my family. And then that expands, as you sort of take care of them, it goes even further to, I'm going to do what's right for my community and my country. And then it can go out even further to, okay, well, now I'm going to expand that sense of self to, refer to maybe all sentient beings or all living beings. And that's kind of what it means. So transcendence, I feel, sort of in this context, may refer to like a lessening of the sense of separation between self and other.
Yes.
And a constant sort of expansion of that self until your circle of concern, if you will, expands to include more and more sort of living beings. And I think that's really what it means to be conscious, right? It's like to be conscious of the impact of what you do to everything else around you. And I think that maybe, does that kind of answer that well?
It totally does, because it was leading to the next question. Because if you look at self-transcendence, I was firstly like, well, what's transcendence? But then what's self? Do you know what I mean? Like,
self? Yeah.
And how do we start unpacking that? I was just at Paul Check's place a week and a bit ago, and we had a 2.5 hour, do you know what I mean, interview, really pulling apart God, consciousness, and self. I pretty much started with a 3-tier question, and we just went for it for 2 and a bit hours on a recording. How do we practically grasp, understand, and use the concept of self in a day-to-day life?
Well, I think that's a great question. It goes kind of back to your first question, which is like, what is the best part of self-development? And I think that you probably want to take a diagnosis and a look of like, okay, well, from a practical perspective, I do need to sort of take care of myself and free myself to some extent. So what is actually going on in my world right now? Am I financially stable? Am I, healthy? Am I fit? How are my energy levels? All that kind of stuff. And then as you start to kind of get that personal responsibility and that sense of control over your own sense of self, to start thinking about how to develop and expand it. And I think that's probably a logical way to do it. And so I think the very idea that a person can take control of their own sort of self and destiny, I think, is maybe the starting point of personal development and the starting point of conscious evolution. And I think that's probably a good practical place to start. And it probably looks different for different people, right? So you're obviously at the stage in your journey where you've sold your business and you've got that financial freedom to do it. You've got probably a lot more options than someone who's maybe a student who's just getting started and needs to take care of some more base level stuff first. But I think that's probably a good map of the territory.
Can I ask you a personal question, Gavin?
Yeah, sure.
In the situation that I'm in now, and I'm very much still teetering on the answering, what do I do in this next chapter of my life after achieving, doing, being all this stuff, right? How do you think I best answer the question, what do I do with myself to best leave the world in a better place than I found it?
That's a great question. Well, I guess the sort of developmental framework I look at, or I sort of came together over the years as I tried to do this work on myself and others. I call it infinite influence, and it's got 6 S's in it, so it's easy to remember, 6 S's. And the first one is called stage. So say, okay, well, what stage of development am I at, using like a spiral dynamics-y kind of framework, right? So spiral dynamics, for people who haven't heard of it, it's basically maps out levels of human development. I've got an hour-long masterclass on it because I probably can explain it here, but it's basically similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As you become wealthy and affluent, as you sort of develop yourself and go up that hierarchy, like where do you sit? And then also, where is your shadow, right? So that's probably like a really good place to start for many people, perhaps yourself as well. Like, what am I actively judging? And so there's 2 types of, so the first S is stage, the second is shadow. And it's what am I judging and what am I admiring? And what you judge in other people is probably the thing that you need to look at in yourself, where if you were to stop judging it, you could reintegrate it back into yourself. And the thing that you often really admire about other people also has that similar characteristic, where you're projecting the better parts of yourself onto others that you could take back and embody. So that's one good way to do it. And then after shadow, you'd say, okay, well, the next one you want to look at is social. So that's the third S, is social. Who am I spending most of my time with? What is the norm of like the 5 people I spend my most time with? What do we all sort of collectively care about as a little tribe? And then what is my cultural conditioning kind of pushing me into thinking, right? So we're obviously both Australian. So there's a sort of a cultural thing that you live in. And then after social, sorry, you want to look at spirit. And so this is sort of, what are my self-transcendent values, right? So there's a kind of process you can go through to look at, well, what is that thing you care about? With the enemy paradigm, you're trying to get clear on some values that kind of speak to you regardless of your own sort of personal well-being. Like, what would you sacrifice stuff for? Is maybe a good way to kind of look at it. Like, if you couldn't get paid for it, if you couldn't get any credit for it, if no one was going to like admire you for doing it, but you had to do it silently and it was total pain, would you still, what would you still be doing? Is a good way to kind of
Sorry, can I just interject, Gavin?
Yeah, of course.
Would a good question for spirit be, if I knew I would fail, I would still X?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And to get a little psycho-spiritual, I mean, that kind of goes to like the Christian tradition around sacrifice, right? It's like the Christ consciousness is around like, well, what are you kind of willing to sacrifice for, right? Which is a pretty good question. And then essentially, yeah, you'd kind of get into self, where you'd build a new sense of self and identity to do that. And then the last one I would talk about is probably state, which is now you've sort of created this new self-authoring identity. Now, how do you sort of, maintain a state of consciousness, which is going to allow you to do that? And that's where some of the meditative practices can kind of come into it. So if you wrap all these 6 together, you end up with a pretty hardcore rip yourself apart, rebuild yourself in the image of that you want to, which, I
love this. Okay, sorry, I'll dig a bit deeper into this. A few things come up to me. I'm going to rip through these S's with what comes
Please
up
do.
initially. Stage. How do I'm just going to be completely selfish. How do I be like, oh, I'm turquoise because I'm fucking fantastic? Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm just getting better and better. Like, how do I properly, like in a business context, for example, when I'm having conversations with other entrepreneurs, a phrase I've come about saying really often is the patient should not diagnose themselves. So an entrepreneur shouldn't
Yeah.
diagnose the problems they're having inside of their business, because the perspective, where they're at, the emotional attachment, all of these things kind of throw them off balance, where I can come in and I can pinpoint the problem within a couple of minutes and it's like completely somewhere else. How do we do that on a personal level?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I mean, and it's coaching, right? And because for the exact reason that you said, because it's extraordinarily hard to be totally self-aware, you know, and to see these things. So some level of coaching will be good. I mean, I like to think I know a lot about this stuff, but I still pay coaches to tell me, you know, where my shadow is, where they think my stage is. You surround yourself with people who, you know, respect you enough, and you respect enough that if they give you something that may on the surface look like criticism, you know, you don't kind of take it personally. So I'd say that's pretty much what you want to do. At the stage level, for sure.
When it comes to shadow, let's say Wilbur's 3-2-1 process with shadow work, is there anything else that you find, like, to be perfectly honest, when I really discovered like the shadow and what that concept was, I struggled to find the practices that would be beyond, let's say, psychotherapy and let's say Wilbur's 3-2-1 process. Like, I was like, what is shadow work? Do you mean, and what, like, I just found a lot of stuff, or a lot of people talking about stuff that just personally, and this could just be my own junk, where I was just like, I'm not relating to that. Like, I'm not feeling that that's effective.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, what's your favorite movie?
June.
Oh, the movie June. Okay, cool. So basically, your favorite movie, you will psychodynamically identify with the protagonist in that movie, right? So that's one good way to kind of get clear on what story you're in.
That's really cool.
Yep. So like there was a whole period where I was like, I love Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is the best. And what I was doing that whole time was training like green types of spiritually people to be more assertive and be more aggressive, right? Which if you watch Cobra Kai, the Netflix series is basically about this karate guy training a bunch of like soft people to be hard. And I was like, oh, that's so funny, right? So you'll go through these kind of ways. So a really good way to kind of understand, cool, what narrative, what story you're living in, is asking that question. And then the other one is, you love it?
Cool. Sorry, I just had an absolute mind blow. Keep going.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's remarkably, surprisingly accurate, right? Anyway, you can ask people. I do it on my Calendly now. Like when people, before they book a call, all I'll usually ask them is like, "What's your favorite movie?" And it sounds really innocuous, but you're telling me exactly like what world you live in, you know, and who you think you are in relation to the world.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's really funny because if you're like, and I remember once asking this one, the wife of a client I was working with in Florida at the time, and she was just like, yeah, it's Terminator, and Terminator 2, Judgment Day. And because she was so fiercely defensive of her family, and like she'd do anything to protect her family, and so she was just really resonating with like, you know, a robot that would essentially stand guard and just do anything to maintain the safety and survival of John Connor, which in her case was her children. So it's just a really fun question, I think, to get to get clear in that story. But yeah, for shadow work, I mean, it's an ongoing practice, I think, of just asking people, or asking yourself, like what you're judging, noticing what you get triggered by, who you judge, like who you kind of label, like, oh, I hate those sorts of, you know, hippie types. It's like, yeah, you probably need more wellness in your life, more of that spirituality and wellness. Or if you're like, God, I hate those capitalist types, it's like, well, you probably need more money to execute properly on your vision. So yeah, whatever you judge is a good indicator. And I'm constantly trying to ask myself that question: who and what am I judging, and how do I sort of, and how? So the practice is basically this: what am I judging, and how would, if I were to integrate that thing that I'm judging into myself positively, how would that make me be able to hit my goals at a higher, faster, and better level?
Hola, I want to say a big thank you, muchas gracias, for listening to the show. Now, really quickly, this show is growing, and it's all thanks to the ratings and reviews. So really quickly, I want to ask, if you have not left a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else that you listen, take the 30 seconds, please click on over, leave a review, as I really want to hear from you. And I want to know what is the best thing so I can cover in future episodes. What guests to bring in, what questions can I answer for you? What is it that you're getting out of being a part of this show as well? And I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this show's success. Thank you so much for clicking over, leaving a review. Now let's get back to the episode. Okay, fuck it, I'm going to put myself out there.
All right.
One thing that I have judgment on others that I know it's wrong, but I'm doing it. and is people that I deem that use psychedelics too much and essentially using it as either escapism and or doing it constantly, but not actually doing the work or the integration for them to actually be a better person after the actual ceremony that they've held.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's really wise, to be honest with you, because that is something that you know, is definitely a negative thing. So, okay, well, so what is the like positive thing that you could take from that? So then maybe that's how do you solve that problem then?
Okay, positive is they're doing something to want to have betterment within themselves.
Yep. Okay, well, so that's the positive. So how could you then, taking that, like, rather than judging that person and sort of pushing them away, how could you then kind of create a space or an environment for people who want to change their state and alter their consciousness to actually develop? And you know, it's interesting. The first thing you kind of judged was self-development, but what I think you're actually want to sort of really now maybe lead in is the actual process, not of just like sort of breaking your brain and playing, you know, and doing psychedelics, but actually consciously developing oneself then, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I like this, Gavin. I like this a lot.
Well, yeah, because the first thing you said was there's a lot of people out there doing all this shit, you know, and I said, tell me what you really think, and you did, and I appreciate that you did, and you have been, obviously, someone like you at your stage, you're not going to be so judgmental and so rigid that it's going to show up as like this total shadow for you, because you're clearly already doing this work. So you kind of already asked, well, what is the better part of that? And I think the better part of it is asking the question, okay, well, clearly people know they need to do something to kind of shift the patterns that are going on. What would it look like for them to actually consciously develop? And how can you embody someone who's taking this path in a more healthy and conscious way to demonstrate what healthy actualization and integration actually looks like?
Okay, so from my perspective, what I tried/wanted doing is, like, I really lean on like Marcus Aurelius' quote is like, do not argue what a good man should be one. So from my perspective, I want to be the example. I want to be the change so that others are able to learn or emulate from. So effectively putting the change into myself and not falling prey to the things that I think that I'm judging in the first place. But how do I, rather than push them away, how do I bring them in? How do I integrate that? That's a really good question.
And so the other part of shadow is also compassion. So is a huge part of it, right? And so you like what's really going on with someone who's doing that, right? Like what are they hiding from themselves, and why are they really doing that? Because if you really dig into it, you know, you might find that like there's something pretty painful down there that they really don't want to confront, or something that they don't want to have to cut off, or some conversation they don't want to have with someone that if they really did do some of that deeper work, you know, it could get pretty confronting, right? I mean, like infinite influence for me is not something that I decided because it would be a really good business opportunity, because it's, you know what I mean? It's like stage development and shadow work. Like it's hardcore stuff. Like it's hardcore, not particularly pleasant, like, you know, but at the same time, like that is quote unquote the work, you know?
Yes.
So
can I just say something, please? I had a conversation with a colleague end of last week, and he built and actually sold a very successful like B2B business coaching company. And then he's gotten into the self-development world. And he said to me, he goes, God damn it, it's so much easier to sell business coaching than it is self-development.
Yeah, well, it's true.
Yeah. And so how do we better sell self-development? Because it is painful stuff that people, and I could be completely wrong, but a lot of people are inherently avoiding because it is painful.
Well, look, I mean, to your friend's point, and maybe to my point, maybe it's showing some of my shadow as well. Business development is self-development, right? If you look at a hierarchy of needs, right? And maybe this is most of my own shadow coming up. Like, you have to have enough of a strong business, or certainly a vehicle for career, whatever you want to call it. Like, you know, you need to have sufficient financial means such that your brain can even stop thinking about, you know, whatever your rent or your mortgage or whatever, and actually start thinking about high level stuff. Like from a survival perspective, you can't develop the self without developing, you know, basic financial stuff. So maybe a fully integrated approach to that would be the way to do it.
Dude, I like that. That was a fucking good answer. who are the teachers in the self-development world that you lean on, that you enjoy, that you take a lot from?
That's a great question. Well, so basically my journey was this. I started, 2010 or something. I was like a law student. I was not not really feeling it because I thought it was unethical. So I read the 4-Hour Work Week, did all that online business stuff. And I was pretty much just selling like internet marketing stuff, pretty basic. I didn't really have much sort of consciousness or spirituality around it. And then I actually went to Mind Valley in 2013 or 14 or something like that. I was like I just did a bunch of stuff. I traveled with my girlfriend. We were kindergarten teachers in South Korea, all sorts of just fun stuff, just for just enjoying that lifestyle. But I went to Mind Valley to get mentored by Vishen Lakhiani on essentially how to be a great entrepreneur and how to scale. And I'll certainly say, and he would agree, like he's not a perfect human, but at the same time, I did notice that he really loved what he was doing, and there was a lot of intrinsic motivation in what he was doing. So I kind of went there to see how he was, how he was managing to essentially use internet marketing, but do it to sort of build and scale something. And the answer was a lot of discipline, a lot of grit, a lot of tenacity, and there was no sort of magic bullet. And I learned a lot of skills and stuff as well. So he was certainly someone there's certainly a lot of elements about what Mind Valley does that I respect. And then I also worked with Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel, and a lot of the stuff they're doing was really cool as well. I respect a lot of the work that they did and are doing. And a lot of people, I respect. So I worked at a not-for-profit called Mind Medicine Australia with two founders who obviously did some great work, Peter Hunt and Tanya de Jong. A lot of respect for them in various capacities. So yeah, I think there's probably a lot of I've got a lot of respect for you now as well, like having just met you and seeing your journey and the sort of humility and the curiosity with which you're sort of going on this path. Our new mutual friend Kylie as well. So yeah, I like to surround myself with people who are asking these great questions, and I guess that's pretty much it. Yeah.
No, this is great. I really appreciate that, Gavin. Thank you. And so the one question that just comes up for me now is, what is it that you want to achieve or do or be or have? Like, what is it that you're wanting to kind of like create into this world, like selfishly yourself?
So I didn't give birth, but I had my beautiful daughter 2 years ago, and that's an incredibly humbling and grounding experience, because I think a lot of the sort of practices you do in meditation around thinking about something you love or feeling a sense of love, like you do a lot of that naturally when you have a child, because you can't talk to them, so you just kind of feel it, right? And so it's a very heart-centering kind of grounding thing for someone like me who's often maybe a little heady. So I'd say first and foremost, I want to be a good father and husband to my kid and wife, respectively. And then beyond that, I guess this last experience, these last 2 years has sort of taught me that, you can actually kind of change, quote unquote, the world if you kind of break that down into something that's a bit more tangible. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to give a lecture at Melbourne Uni on how to change the world and all this kind of stuff. And basically I said, when we talk about changing the world, we're not talking about changing physics. What we're mostly talking about is changing culture, policies, politics, law, all these kind of things. And so if you start to then look at like, well, okay, what could we probably do as a country to sort of be better? That's kind of where my headspace is going now. And how can I kind of rally all these people, actually much like yourself, who are at these developmental stages where they're asking questions? How do we be more conscious and responsible citizens? How do we use the wealth we've cultivated for, beneficial reasons? And broadly speaking, I'm curious how we can develop an Australia that is kind of the future of this Australia, right? So, where we are as a nation, we're probably on the verge of at some point becoming maybe a republic or something like that, or at least finding our own sorts of sense of collective identity, whatever that looks like. And I'm curious what we can achieve as a country. So I'm curious about bringing, people together to sort of help sort of elevate the consciousness of Australia, sort of get the leadership development, to a place where we're thinking at that higher level. Because I think as a country, if you look at it developmentally, we have so much natural abundance, and we certainly have a lot of issues that we need to fix. But I think a lot of these issues could probably be fixed more by changing our mindset rather than changing the actual access to natural resources and stuff that we actually have. You know what I mean? It's like we have a huge block of land with a hell of a lot of resources here, a hell of a lot of connections, a hell of a lot of smart people. It's like, should we really be having as many problems as we have here? Like if we were to kind of fix our well, elevate our thinking and really get that consensus and collaboration, I think we could achieve a lot as a country. So that's kind of where my headspace is at.
Okay, no, I really love this. I want to dig this. I'm going to get my shovel and let's get digging. So for myself, it's actually, we only moved back to Australia, I don't know, to three and a bit months ago. And so I was out of Australia as an expatriate for 11 years. I lived in Dubai for 2 years, and then Bali for 9 years. And I found it really interesting coming back, and it was a huge kind of like doing 10, 11-year chapter of our lives where we've had 4 children, we lived around the world, like doing these businesses, blah, 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 blah. And then my wife and I were like, all right, like it's time for us to move on to this next chapter. We wanted to move back to Australia. Here we are. And I've just fallen in love with the land. I've fallen back in love with just like, oh my God, like this is incredible. So, and it's funny because you actually said it when you were talking about how do we change. And I was thinking about when it comes to self-development or development of the personality, I was also then thinking about how do we then put that into politics or the collection of people as well. And I was thinking of like Plato's The Republic. And I remember reading that and very much being fascinated on, oh my God, I appreciate what he's pointing at and how he's trying to dissect what's going on, but obviously seeing as well that there is some things that I didn't agree with that he was really forming in that argument of what the Republic really was. So when you look at it, Gavin, if we were to change, develop, improve the way, and I use the word politics in kind of like how we actually cultivate a sense of identity, but also change within the group collective. How do we actually do that?
It's a great question. So for me, the interesting thing that keeps coming up with Australia is maybe the tall poppy syndrome. And that's actually an interesting one because I think there's just some really, 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 really brilliant Australians, and a lot of them are around the world in other organizations and other countries. And so, you know, it's funny. I almost sold a company a few years ago. It was funnily enough to Tucker Max, that guy who had who wrote.
Dude, I was at Tucker's place 2 weeks ago.
Oh no shit! There you go. Yeah. Anyway, so I almost sold my an internet marketing company to him a few years ago. I didn't go through for various reasons, but we're still friends. And so when that went through, we did a book workshop, and the thing was like, okay, I felt like I was financially bound at the time, and the book I wanted to write was called Growing Tall Poppies. And it was, you know what I mean? So it was essentially about like repatriating excellent Australians, which funnily enough is, you know, what you've done. Because it's like the dean of the Wharton School was an Australian guy, like the president of Tesla is this Australian. Like we have a lot of really, really bright people. And the question for me is just like, well, how do we repatriate these people, bring them, not that they have to be anti other countries, but I'm just like, well, what would it actually look like if we had an Australia that kind of, this is all very early stage, and I'm probably talking about it for the first time.
I love what you're saying. Please keep going. This is really good.
You know what I mean? Even one of my best friends who's like a music producer, you know, Emmy nominated, he's in LA. It's like, what would it look like if we kind of created a safe space, if you will, for Australian excellence to sort of come home and to kind of drive that forward for the next, I don't know, 100 years, 50, 100 years, or whatever it looks like. That's kind of what where my questions would go to, because I think I completely agree with you. I had in my mind, oh, you know, Australia's not entrepreneurial. People can't do this stuff here. Got to go to America, you know. But it's like, I like America, but it's like, I am an Australian fundamentally. Like I was talking to Kylie just before this. It's like, I had Vegemite on toast this morning. So did she. And we're both proud of it. You know what I mean? And so yeah, that's kind of the question I'm asking. I certainly don't have the right, all the answers, but I'm sure we could probably all find them, you know?
Okay. So this is so funny you bring this up. Do you mean I was in Austin a couple of weeks ago, was at Tucker's place, a bunch of other people, amazing. Then I was in LA for a little bit to do some work with some partners that were there. And it was interesting because when I was in LA, I was just like, oh, the energy here is so good. Like, I was just like, and then I actually quickly chatted with a partner this morning, and we were talking about doing some sales workshops for him. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to fly back out in 6 weeks. And I was like, why can't we do this stuff here? Like,
yes,
I don't love getting on planes. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't love it. And I very much felt that tall poppy syndrome
Yeah.
when I first moved to Dubai, because when I got there, I just was suddenly mesmerized by the help and confidence others were giving me as I was going on to this new venture. And I was like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like I didn't feel like people were trying to tear me down. They were trying to bring me up. And they're like, oh, you've got to do this. You've got to meet this person. Like, and I was just like, oh my God, like it's proliferating in front of me.
Yeah.
How can we cultivate more of that here? Like if I was to be the change, do you mean that I want to see in the world? How does that really play out?
I think that's a fantastic question. So if you want to go back to developmental stages, I think a lot of them will sort of oscillate between collective, individual, right? That's kind of what it looks like. So the first, like after the sort of wild, wild west, everyone's in a little tribe kind of killing each other to get stuff, stage of human evolution, it went to essentially law and order, right? Which is like, we got rules, we got regulations, and we do things as a collective because we can be better collectively than we can as individuals, right? And it's not about one person taking everything. It's about, having this sort of collective sense of responsibility. And I think Australian tall poppy syndrome probably existed at that stage, right? Which is a very sort of imperial law and order kind of stage. And then for people who wanted to kind of break out from that, it was just like, whoa, stay in this mold. It's served us for a long time. And I think that was really built off maybe like a sense of scarcity that, there wasn't maybe enough for everyone. But from that, of course, there's some beneficial components to that. But I wonder if as a country now, we may be going beyond that into sort of recognizing more of the, ability of individuals self-actualize, at that self-actualizing stage to both contribute back to the collective as individuals in their own way. And so I think that is hopefully even happening as a shift. I mean, if you think about all the sort of social media and this sort of culture, it's just totally normal for guys like us to fly in between, Australia and America. And some of that is cross-pollinating in terms of the culture and even Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of catalyzing a stage level development or perhaps even a shadow integration, if you will, because I feel as though Australia also has that green thing like totally dialed in, right, which is also collective, which is all the compassionate stuff. And we really have that. So we maybe have a society that is like both orderly and also like very compassionate. I think that's probably a good way to describe Australia, but it maybe doesn't quite have that like, entrepreneurial, orange, individualistic kind of edge, which can have unhealthy manifestations. Like I think we've maybe seen that, and there can really be some unhealthy, selfish manifestations and exploited manifestations of that. But a healthy orange integration in Australia would probably be what you're referring to, and would probably make it more of a place where people, as you say, could feel as though they could have these conversations, do these kind of things. And perhaps us having this conversation is starting that integration itself.
Yeah, that's really true. Maybe this is exactly what needs to be happening anyway. I want to jump in and say thank you for listening and supporting the show, as at the moment we don't run any ads on the show. And if you're getting value, if you're loving the show, then I invite you right now to share this episode. Share this directly to a friend or share it on your socials. And when you do share it on social, please tag me so I can personally say thank you to you. My social handle is at Chris Dufey. That's Chris Dufey, as it means a huge deal to me, as this show is about us coming together as a community to help each other grow, as I really do believe that a rising tide lifts all ships. So take a screenshot, grab the link and share it with a friend that you think could get value out of this together. It will put a huge smile on my face and I very much appreciate it. Gavin, you are incredible.
Likewise, man. Likewise.
I'm going to keep this in the recording, or we can take it out if you want. But anyway, how do I best help and support you?
That's a great question. So I'm basically trying to put together a couple of things. First of all, I'm trying to put together basically a piece of content or a funnel or whatever you want to call it that's going to aggregate and collect all people who are thinking like this so that we can essentially come together. Because I guess the fact that you and I are having these same thoughts and thinking this way, but aren't collaborating is a problem. You know what I mean? If we want the same thing, so that's the first part. The second part of it is I want to make it sort of accessible to people. And then the third part is, I guess, a mastermind where people like us collaborate, come together and basically have this shared common vision and find a way to execute it. I was just talking about this with our mutual friends, Kylie and Eric, one of my friends who's a former CEO of Mindvalley, amazing guy as well. And we basically all talking about elevating consciousness, elevating humanity, and all that kind of jazz, just that kind of jazz. And I think the mechanism for distributing that into society, or into Australia certainly, will be somehow through really healthy and good personal development and really good, healthy leadership. And that's kind of like how people will understand it and describe it. And I think sort of helping come into that and supporting that would probably be the best way to do it. And so obviously, part of that is being the guy, which you already are doing, asking the questions, and then figuring out some way that we can, I guess, collaborate to sort of scale this out into organizations and give people this map of development so they can kind of diagnose themselves, work in their own shadow, understand who they're spending their time with, how their cultural conditionings affected them, find those self-transcendent values, reauthor the self, and then maintain that state of consciousness to sort of to do it,
What do you, this is interesting. So a couple of things come to my head when this gets brought up, and I will think of incentives, like Charlie Munger's quote, show me the incentive and I'll show you the result. And so what do you think is the right incentive to sell someone on so that they go on this journey?
So I think it's a mixture of hitting your potential and doing good. I think it's both. I think a lot of the people I speak to who are at this stage, where they're kind of like, what's the next thing? They want to do something a bit more creative. They want to hit their potential, but they also want to do it in a way that is not like that sort of narcissistic, grandiose, exploitative kind of attitude, but like they want to do it in a way that is win-win. And that's really where those sort of high developmental stages happen. So I think it's kind of, find out how you can do how you can hit your potential whilst also helping in the world. I mean, so this is all, relatively fresh off the press, but for me, I've got infinite influence, power for good, which is like use that influence and power for good. And then there's another program I want to create called infinite affluence, conscious wealth creation, which is about sort of using, if you think about it, that is an orange integration kind of a program, right? As wealth, money, and power, right? Two words that are quite negatively viewed, on the basis you don't think, that good people are necessarily chasing those things, but how do you look at those things in a different light? How do you look at influences as a force for positive cultural evolution and positive cultural change, as opposed to just like whatever, selling some flogging some stuff? And how do you look at wealth as a means of positive transformation, as opposed to just pure personal accumulation?
Yeah, this is really interesting, because actually the two things that you said with the incentive are actually two essays that I've planned to write in the next coming months. One on potential and what is potential and what does it mean to actually reach one's potential, but also altruistically, what are the morals and the ethics behind us from a capitalistic point of view to be able to give, and how does that actually work in the ecosystem of wanting to be able to be selfish and giving, and what's the moral behind that? Just with the potential side of things, for you, Gavin, what does it mean for someone to reach their potential?
I think it means to stop being limited by, it's to have freedom to, not just have freedom from. So to have freedom from, so you can have freedom to, which is a Dan Sullivan quote, where he says, like, once you have sort of freedom from scarcity, freedom from sort of that, maybe it's actual scarcity, maybe it's some of your own preconceived limiting beliefs. And when you really understand what is possible for any human, to achieve, like, what would you be doing? Like, what is your best nature? What does your unrestricted best nature look like? And how do you kind of get there and fully embody and execute that? I think that's kind of what I mean by potential.
That's funny, because I've been really trying to rip this apart. So I'd be really interested to see what comes up for you when I just riff on this for a second. So I believe that one of the key values that I really operate from was freedom. I want freedom. But then when I was really trying to pull that apart, I was like, what is that at the end of the day? And then I came across in Rudolf Steiner's The Philosophy of Freedom. He talks initially about the two different types of freedom. And so freedom, D-O-M with the ending, is like the typical freedom that we talk about, but it comes from an external source, where he uses the word in German, and excuse my shitty German, Freiheit, So freedom, but a HEIT at the end of it is like the internal freedom. So that's the freedom that we get from like the inside that we are allowed to be giving to ourselves. And I've been playing with that concept was like, okay, what am I doing that gives me external freedom, and what do I need to do to give myself internal freedom as well, so that it's collaborate. It's almost like a flywheel effect. How can I create a flywheel effect for it to only get better and better? What comes up for you when I just go on a random rant like that?
For you personally?
Yeah.
It's a good question. Well, I mean, I'd have to kind of look into it, but I guess if you're in that kind of position, I think you probably want clarity, right? Clarity in terms of like some of the next steps. And I think, so what's your question? Like, what comes up for you in terms of your potential?
No, what comes up for you when I'm like trying to pass through freedom from outside and freedom from inside?
Oh, okay. Well, I'd say, yeah, if you've got that sort of external freedom where you've got the financial freedom, I'd say there's maybe something in your own mind potentially that's limiting you. I mean, it depends on on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate like how fully embodied you are and your potential? Like, where would you say you're at? You think you're like, you feel like there's some sort of handbrake on that's kind of keeping you a little bit back, or what's going on there?
There's a handbrake for sure.
Okay, cool.
Can I put my finger on it and like palpate on it? I don't feel confident in that right now.
All right, beautiful. Yeah, so that would be the thing to do then. It would be to get that internal freedom, because something is stopping you from fully expressing that potential. And it's very likely something, well, actually, I don't know exactly what it is, but we would have similar conditioning if you grew up in Australia. So it could very well likely be something around that. It could be something from early childhood. That's hard to say. But yeah, you'd want to kind of get clear on that. You'd want to do a bit of regression work, find out what that is. At least make it conscious, surface it. It'll still probably feel uncomfortable. But then you'd ask the question, okay, well, if I didn't have this belief, like what would I be doing? And then despite the fact that might feel extremely uncomfortable, you just have to do it. So
can I share something with you?
Of course you can. Yeah.
More than willing to be as transparent as I possibly can, because this was interesting. This actually came up with Tucker's conversation that I had, and him and I had something really similar. My parents were both 17 when I was born, and something that came up a lot with like inner child work and 18 plus months of psychotherapy and a bunch of stuff was me not feeling like I was wanted or I should have been here in this world. And it was like this unworthiness that was like this underlying thing. And for me to then feel worthy, I have to do and achieve, and like, I mean, me, myself, and just my being isn't enough. And it's an interesting word, because I'm writing a book at the moment called Enough is Enough, because I'm really trying to find out like, what is enough when it comes to development, money, power, sex, whatever it is.
No, that's a great question. And yeah, and thank you for sharing that. Well, so if that's the edge, usually what it'll come back to, and it's amazing that you're a father, so you can kind of appreciate it at this level. And yeah, maybe a little intense to do now live on the on the call, but I mean, you do some of that regression work, and you kind of send yourself back as an adult to talk to yourself as a young child, and you tell them what is true. You know what I mean? And you have the and we can do that. I wouldn't probably do that live, but we can do something like that as a session if you want to, or I can help you with that. But you'll get to something that I think, we'll kind of fill that enough for you to, when that nagging feeling starts to come up, for you to be able to sort of push it down. In my experience, it's very hard to completely eliminate some of that early childhood stuff, which is why the greatest gift you can give to your children is to not, create those wounds in the first place. Because I think, as Gabor Mate once said, it takes a hell of a lot of therapy to squash that stuff down. And you can certainly get past it, and it's not a death sentence by any stretch of the imagination. But if you can avoid it with your own children, definitely do. But yeah, you can suppress it to the point where you realize that, you are enough, and you can take that drive and motivation and use it to propel you to even further points,
That's really good.
And I think one of my friends and coaches actually said that the trauma heals when compassion meets the wound, right? And so you know, you've got a 17-year-old, you know, obviously we're attracted to each other and whatever. And they, you know, they did their thing and they had their kid. It's obviously you. And like, shit, if I was 17, you know, I'm kind of an idiot now. At 17, I was even more of an idiot. And so you can kind of, you know what I mean? You can kind of have some compassion for it. And it's like, you got to go through that process of both being angry and, you know, feeling agitated and annoyed because they're your parents, but also, you know, if you can have that compassion to see that they were 17-year-old kids, then probably had very little to do with you. And it's more than likely that they didn't have enough, not that you weren't enough. You know what I mean? So if you were to kind of do a little perspective shift on that, because yeah, not a cheap country we live in for that matter.
It's like, especially with what you said before, I think that was very good. I think it was Carl Jung that said that the greatest burden of a child is the unlived life of their parents. And that is something I very want to stay as conscious as possible, not to pass on to my 4 daughters, and to let them flourish as themselves. Gavin, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you. I've got interviews for an executive assistant coming up that I'm going to have to hold, so we're going to have to wrap this right now. But if it's cool with you, dude, I'd want to do this so much more. You're an incredible human being. I've really enjoyed this.
Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Likewise, I'm so grateful to have been connected with you and met you, and I'm really excited to go on this journey together. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. No, before I let you go though, and for the audience, like, where do we go to be able to find out more about what you're doing? Kind of like, how do we best actually support the projects that you're working on in yourself?
Thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah, so just go to gavinabeyratne.com, which is just my name, and it's spelled, Abeyratne is my last name, and the first name's Gavin. And just go there, and there'll be somewhere I'll ask your email address, and or sell you something cheap to help fund my advertising. And do me a solid, and whatever it is, do me a solid. It's for a good cause. It's for a good reason. And then we'll connect. We'll get in touch. And actually, the first thing that people will get is a masterclass explaining the 6 S's and going hardcore into stage level development, because it's just, as you know, it's beyond what I could do justice to in a short period of time. But there's an hour-long masterclass there with one of my friends from Northern California who's incredible. She's got I think she's got like a master's in transpersonal psych, and we do that masterclass together. And so that's what you get there. gavinabeyratne.com. Check that out, and we'll be in touch.
Beautiful, brother. I appreciate that.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. I really, truly hope that you have enjoyed this. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the show, please do so, because it would be a bummer if you'd miss out on the amazing episodes that are going to be coming. And one of the best ways for you to be able to support the show is to leave a review and to be able to share it out on social. And if you do share it out on social, please tag me. My handle is @Chris Dufey. That's Chris Dufey, as I would love to say a personal thank you for you sharing it out, and for you to join us on the show as well. And as always, thank you so much. I feel privileged, I feel thankful, I feel grateful. I feel really blessed being able to do this and being able to have you join us as we figure this stuff out that we call life at the end of the day, and being able to do it with amazing conversations that we do here in this show together as well. So I'm wishing you an amazing day, and I'm really looking forward to us coming together in the next episode.